nothing to do. Okay, so now we're resuming recording. So picking up where we left off yesterday, we were talking about the scientific method, essentially, and how we can learn things, test things, interpret things, and that cycle gives rise to lots of evidence. We mush all those pieces of evidence together, we reduce the amount of assumptions that we have, and then we have what we call a theory. But we don't just want to know things when we're HR practitioners, right? We also want to build things that positively impact the world around us, right? Just knowing something is insufficient. One of my favorite quotes from a psychologist ever is a guy named Kurt Lewin, and he said, no action without research and no research without action, right? Research without action is useless, and action without research is reckless, right? And so we want to be building things and doing cool things, but we want to do them based on the cool stuff that we know. But just knowing something is fundamentally insufficient. Now, if you are a civil engineer or a mechanical engineer, you work in the world of the physical, right? HR practitioners tends to work more in the abstract. We're building software, we're building business processes, we're building policies, we're building dashboards, right? We're building soft things that you mess around with on the computer, but it's still building. And so this building engineering process, if you remember the video from the Boston Museum, talked a lot about the differences between practical learning about how to do stuff versus scientific learning being structured in how you learn and know stuff. So the first thing we do when we want to build something is that we want to design and iterate. We want to think about what is the problem that we're solving, and then what might exist in order for us to make that easier, faster, cheaper, better, right? And you can think of this like a salesperson or a marketing person, right? Designing something technological, right? How do I design a better cleat? Or how do I design a better baseball bat? Or how do I design, right, a more compelling pitch for my church, right? All of those different things could help us design a thing that's going to get us where we want to go. Once we design a thing, we have to then create it, right? The first thing is writing it on a bar napkin. The next thing is writing it on a whiteboard. The next thing is actually building a prototype, right? And whether this is a bridge made out of balsa wood or it's a pilot dashboard, we go off and we actually start to take materials, whether they're physical or otherwise, and we stick them together to see if the design that we think about ultimately works. And this is where testing happens in engineering compared with science, right? In science, we're testing our assumptions. We're testing our premises to see if they hold up. In engineering, we're testing the thing that we built to see that if it works the way that we think it does, right? And this is where we might do a pilot and put a new program out there and see if people actually do their job better, or they do quit less, or they do grow in the way that we expected them to. And that's where testing in engineering happens. And in that Boston Museum video, they talked about the fact that both science and engineering are evidentially based pursuits, right? They're both using evidence. They're just using evidence for different purposes. And testing, obviously, if you couldn't see this coming, right, lets us observe in a whole new world. Because when you go off and you test the thing that you built, whether it's a program or a dashboard or a policy, you can then observe and wonder some more and then go mess with your iterations, right, and your designs. And now we've created a new cycle. So on the right-hand side, well, actually, before we do that, we're going to finish this up. And when we do that and it works, after we've done a bunch of tests and iterations, we can then produce the thing. We can commercialize it. We can scale it. We can go from rolling out that hypo program in one branch of the bank to rolling it out for all the branches in the bank, right? Because we piloted it, we've designed it, we saw what didn't work, we've pressure tested it, and now we can scale it or commercialize it, right? And this goes for the things we do in HR just as much as they go for people who build bridges or people who build chips for computers or people who build airplanes. It's the same concept. Now, this design here is intentionally linked, and it's intended to look like this circle that goes back and forth, right? Because on the right-hand side, we're challenging what we know and we're growing that. And on the left side, we're actually doing stuff with that knowledge. And that's how we get from this idea of science being a critical part of what we do to create premises and arguments and test those with data, but then use that knowledge to actually go off and do stuff, whether that's building policies, changing programs, influencing benefits, changing how we pay, changing how we market, changing how we manage people. That all comes more under the sides of engineering. Now, Ben and I already told you that this class is more about the science side of stuff because we're going to be learning about the argumentation and the testing of knowledge. But never forget that you're probably more of an engineer than you are as a scientist when you're sitting in an organization being an HR practitioner. Before we jump into the exercise here, Ben, do you have any thoughts?
Thanks, Chris. I was actually going to give an example of a very HR example that some of you may actually be familiar with if you work in an organization. And one of the things we do a lot at Qualtrics, for example, is we build software solutions for organizations to measure and manage their employees' experience. A lot of the stuff we were chatting about yesterday. And so we actually follow what we don't use this framework, but we actually do. And that, for example, one of the solutions that we probably our biggest solution that we put out in the market is a solution to help organizations measure employee engagement. And so if you think about that on the right side of this with the science, a lot of what we were doing was based on an existing theory of employee engagement. And I guess by a show of hands on the screen, how many of you are pretty familiar with that term employee engagement? Yeah, pretty familiar. So generally in the research, that's defined as a cognitive and emotional and a behavioral attachment that an employee has to their work and their organization. So there's been a lot of work done on this. There's a theory that if you're engaged, you're going to give discretionary effort, you're going to do your job better, and you're going to stick around longer in the organization. And then we also have a lot of theory and a lot of data suggests that certain things predict whether somebody's going to be engagement. And just I guess if you know off the top of your head, what would be some of the things that you know drive employee engagement? Just spit it out.
I would say culture, workplace
Culture.
culture.
Motivation.
So motivations to me is kind of like the same thing or the outcome of engagement. But what would be some of those things like that would influence whether somebody's engaged or not? So culture is a good one.
Incentives.
Incentives. What else?
Role satisfaction.
Yep. Satisfaction with the role.
Relationship with managers.
Yep. The exact promotions. Exactly. Yep, that you exactly right. So all the things you're talking about. So that it was basically established already. And so what we did was, hey, we'd like to put our own solution out there. We want to move from the right side to the left side. We want to build something that we can then monetize that we think is better. And so what we literally did was we were asking and testing, we were using the existing research that was available. We were making some additional tweaks to that, testing that. We're interpreting those results. We came to a solution. And then we started to design what that solution looked like. What does the user experience look like for the people who are going to consume this? What about for the survey takers? So then we started to refine. We tested that out in the field. We put that initial survey out. We looked at the data. Oh, you know what? That item didn't operate the way we thought it was going to. We thought it was going to correlate with engagement and it didn't. Let's pull that out. So we tweaked and then we put it into the market. But what we do, to Chris's point, is we're continuously questioning that. The external environment changes. We talked a little bit about that last night. And that changes what's salient, what's important to people. And so this is really a never-ending cycle of researching and continuing to develop the theory of engagement, what engagement drives and what drives engagement. And we're always continuing to iterate on the actual build and the design of the solution. So I just thought I would give that example because I think it's a perfect example of how a very HR-centric solution that's based in research and science goes right into engineering and then goes back to science and then back to engineering and back to science and so forth.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. We're going to jump now into a breakout exercise. So essentially, in the same way that we talked about theories yesterday, I now want y'all to think about products. And it could be an HR product like Dr. Ben just talked about, or it could be any product. It could be any product that you really love, that you feel engaged with. And I want you and your partner to think about four things, right? What was the problem that was identified by the inventor? What was the initial design that they had? Did it work right away? What iterations did they have to have? And then what value has it provided to society since its commercialization, right? And I'll give you guys a quick example. One of my favorites from a management philosopher named Simon Sinek, he loves to talk about TiVo and how this idea of being able to pause, rewind, record live television was something that was invented by TiVo. but TiVo actually was pretty bad at it, and DVR ultimately overtook it as a more popular way to do the very same thing. So that was a product that hit the market. They identified a problem, but the design didn't really work. It didn't really hit the market in a good way. So they went back and they reiterated how it worked. And ultimately now it's something that is how many people on a regular basis view TV on demand as opposed to streaming linearly, right? Like that wasn't a thing 20 years ago, right? And that came from them, right? So the idea of pausing and rewinding live TV that now all major cable packages have was initially invented by the TiVo people. So I want you guys, I'm going to break you all out into this, into your groups. Think about any innovation you want, 10 minutes, and then we're going to come back in 10 minutes and we're going to talk about this iterative cycle of what was the problem, what did they do about it, how did they test and iterate on it, and how did it ultimately become a better product today because of that? Cool? All right, back in 10. Cool. So let's jump right in. Who's got some stuff to talk about? What products did you guys bring up when you were thinking through this?
My partner and I could go first. That's no problem.
Let's hear it, Stuart. What you got?
So we're gonna present it together because we don't want to, But I'll go with the first part. We decided to go with ankle braces or any injury braces.
Okay.
In general. What was the problem? The problem is that athletes would get hurt and they want to play through the injury, but they did not have anything to support or protect from further injuring themselves. So, for example, an ankle twist, and the doctor says you can't play through it, but they want to play through it because that's the athlete in them that wants to pursue what they want to win. So that's one. Ankles, joints, knees, shoulders, they have braces for all this, right? And the opportunity here is that the invention of braces creates an opportunity for the athlete to play through the injury with a lesser chance of further injuring themselves, while at the same time helping the injured area heal and grow strength.
So what's a major iteration of the athletic brace that was optimized after its initial rollout?
So we talked about that, like, the flexibility and because the pre-models were all plastic and they were durable and strong, but they weren't flexible to the athlete. So changing the material from like plastic to more of like a Velcro, more comfortable and flexible model helped an athlete be less uncomfortable, and it promoted even more strength because now it's flowing with the athlete instead of just being straight on. So it's actually promoting their own ankle strength and their own knee strength as than just it being just a brace.
That's a really, really good example, Mallory. And it actually reminds me of a breakthrough in science that I learned about when my younger son broke his leg when he was 4. What I learned at the time is that, to your guys' point, when I was a kid, when you broke a bone or you hurt yourself, what did they do? They tied it up, they braced it, and they said, do not move it until it's healed, right? And that is archaic science now, right? What do we want to promote after we get injured now? We want to promote blood flow as quickly as possible because blood flow leads to healing. And so they're taking kids out of braces and they're taking athletes out of their braces and they're starting to move them right away. They're even putting casts on that are not permanent, right? So this idea of the thing is broken, make it still, and when you make it still, it heals better is the idea of a brace, right? But over time, we've iterated and iterated and iterated because we've realized and learned through science that the engineering of the product wasn't optimized. And so now the way braces look now is so different than even 10 years ago, which is totally different than they look 30 years ago. That's a really, really good example. Thanks, guys. Who else?
I can go. Oh, was someone else gonna go? Sorry. Tyler and I were talking about computers and like the origin of computers, and so we used Apple as an example. So the problem or opportunity identified by Apple was that originally computers were mainly used by hobbyists and engineers. So Apple identified the opportunity to simplify home computing so that normal everyday people could access and navigate the web. And this idea took off with the creation of the Apple II. So they initially designed the Apple I, and that iteration was mimicking the success of the Altair 8800 DIY, which was aimed and targeting engineers, tech people. And so I think that Apple probably decided to switch strategies and target a different audience. So obviously it didn't work right away. They had to take a different approach by identifying this gap in the user market rather than copying the success of previously established companies. And then it provided immense value to society because it revolutionized the way that normal people interact with technology, and it opened up a world of possibilities and innovation to users that would have previously never been exposed to tech or the digital sphere. So completely revolutionized home computing and technology in your hands.
This is a great example. Does anybody know what the number one, there's actually two, what are the number 1 and 2 inventions in the computer that revolutionized its application and adoption in the consumer market?
The GUI.
The GUI. That's exactly right. The mouse and the keyboard. The first home computers, the computer my grandfather had that I grew up with, was a DOS prompt, right? And if you couldn't write code, you didn't use a computer, right? And that created, it was a great design. It worked. You could do all kinds of things. Industry was using them. Engineers were using them. Academia was using them. Academia actually birthed the internet, right? It was initially for sharing research between universities. That was the first reason the internet existed. But it didn't blow up until designers were like, wait a minute, not everyone's going to code. How do we make it so that people don't actually have to code? Graphic user interface. You're exactly right, Tyler. And that revolutionized the way computers arrived in the consumer market. And the rest is history, as they say. That's a fantastic example. Let's do one more.
Can I talk about a problem that failed, or does it had to have?
Yeah, no, fail. Yeah.
So does it remember BlackBerry?
I was just gonna say that.
BlackBerry is a great example. Tell me why you chose BlackBerry.
Well, I just remembered it, and it was actually, I believe it was the world's first smartphone. So what was the problem, or what was the opportunity identified? And it was designed. I think it was well known for the keyboards, and it kind of revolutionized. I think it kind of kicked off the whole smartphone models and allowing users to send and receive messages on the go. And then it was also more secure than those of its competitors. And did it work right away? Yes, but it was slow to adapt and lost its core market because they weren't quick in being advanced, and also focused heavily on the enterprise versus consumer preferences. So they ended up failing and got beat by the iPhone.
They were more focused on the corporate market, and they didn't see the opportunity to design for the true consumer market. If any of you remember this, I do. That was back in a time where you still got charged for text messages. But if you had a BlackBerry, you could text message other BlackBerries for free. And that was a huge deal because at the time you had a plan and you could only text at certain time, right? And they were very focused, to your point, Julie, on businesses and business people. And they saw that those were the people that needed this. And they didn't design and iterate and wonder effectively enough to see what Apple and Android saw, right? And then even when they got hit in the face with it, they didn't really respond. And now nobody has BlackBerries. So, so not every design is a success. There are a lot of opportunities that don't happen, right? Another good example is a company called Kodak, right? Which some of you may or may not have heard of, who were, a Fortune 100 company in their heyday, but they never got with the digitalization of photography, and down they went because they didn't engineer the way that they existed to meet what the future demanded from the consumer market. So I'm glad that we did consumer products. I'm glad that everybody chose consumer markets. And it's something I do a lot with my teams and in my coaching. I'm not sure if you do, Dr. Ben, or not, but I compare what we do in HR to consumer markets all the time because we're all selling every day. We're selling our ideas, we're selling our research, we're selling our data, and we're not competing against other products when we work in HR. We're competing with non-compliance. We're competing with workarounds. We're competing with substandard approaches, right? But never forget that you're competing for the attention and the compliance of the customers that you serve, whether they know it or not. And so the ability to design something that people love and want to use is just as important in HR as it is in sales. So always, always, always keep that in mind. Ben, anything to close out before we jump into research and analytics?
The only thing I was gonna go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So I was mentioning this to Julie because BlackBerry, somehow we ended up with BlackBerry. So I'm just curious. So BlackBerry was the first, but they went out of business. How come Motorola and Nokia are still alive and they were basically around when BlackBerry was around? Like, was it just because they adapted better and faster than BlackBerry? Because we were reading that, I think it was Verizon, Julie said, basically told them that you need to come up with a phone better than the iPhone. If not, then we're kicking you out. And that's what essentially they did.
I might have to do some more homework to tell you to be 100% on this, Puria. But my guess is that Motorola and Nokia are not phone companies. They make phones, but the money that they make and their success as a commercial business reaches far beyond cell phones. I don't know what hardware company actually owned BlackBerry or if the brand was purchased by somebody or spun down, but I do know that Nokia and Motorola don't make their money making cell phones.
Correct.
They make their money making all kinds of other stuff.
Correct. That's how we
So
know of them. But
yeah,
there's a lot of there's a big business to business B2B in Motorola and Nokia. Yeah. No,
Ben,
the
were
only thing I was
you
going
have
to
a
say
thought
was
before we
in
jump?
reference to the Blockbuster piece is if you've ever seen the movie American Psycho, which has some great one-liners. I still use that phrase like when somebody invites me to something I don't want to do. I'm sorry, I got to return some videotapes. So just throwing that out there in case you want to use it.
All right. So we're going to move on and we're going to talk a little bit about types of research and types of analytics. You read some of this in the textbook, hopefully, and you all watched some videos that reference these concepts. But we're going to start talking about analytics by talking about what analytics is not. Because these will be confused in your jobs today or in the jobs you're going to have in the future. Digitalization is converting information into a digital format. And I'm going to tell you a little story about another innovation that shifted industry, right? There's going to be a lot of quotes, a lot of analogies, a lot of movies before this class is over. And this is one of the first biggest ones. And that is that the internal combustion engine shifted the industry of transportation, right? But what it does from an HR practitioner's perspective is it creates new kinds of work, right? Going backwards from the engine, we now need mechanics and we need people that design engines. And going forward from the things we put the engine in, we need pilots and we need people that design those modes of transportation, cars, boats, airplanes, etc. And the reason that this matters is that digitalization over the last 20 years or so has revolutionized the way that HR happens, right? You're going to watch some videos before next week's classes that talk a lot about the HR lifecycle and the tech stack that underpins it. And digitalization fundamentally has changed the way that HR happens because people don't look in the newspaper, go to an office, pick up a paper application, apply to it, mail it in, and then people go through stacks and you have to call people to get your resume to the top of the stack anymore. That's not the way it happens. It's a totally different process. But when we think about digitalization, there's all these different kinds of work, and oftentimes non-technical people will conflate this, and they'll put it all into the world of reporting and analytics. But data engineering and database administration and information technology and software development are not reporting and analytics. Now, another important to think about is that analytics is not reporting, right? Reporting is essentially the art of moving information around the organization. And so what I want to call out today as you guys get deeper into this idea of research and science and understanding information is that when you're in your roles, digitalization and reporting are discrete bodies of work. They require discrete skill sets that are not the same as analytics. Now, if you work in a medium or small organization, you may have to do all of these things. But an important thing for you to be able to do is to be able to differentiate these kinds of work and make sure that the people that are above you or beside you can understand what kind of work you're doing. If you're going to go build a chatbot because you want a chatbot to screen calls that come into your HR service center before it to triage better where it goes, that's not fundamentally an analytics exercise. You may use analytics to determine how you want your tree branching and your prompts to work, but ultimately what you're trying to do is digitalize a manual process. The process of somebody picking up the phone and triaging where the call needs to go is something you're trying to digitalize and give it to an automated system. That is fundamentally different than using science and research methods to create conditions that tell you things that help you make better decisions. But we often put it all into one big bucket. And so I want to call out these different things: digitalization, which is about making things go faster using technology; reporting, which is all about getting the data in front of the right person so that that person can understand it; and analytics, which is what this course is about, which is about understanding the information that you're getting and even generating that information so you can understand it so that you can make better decisions. I'm going to pause there because I'm interested in if you guys have questions or thoughts or things that this stirs up for you.
I just never knew this was an actual thing, but it's cool because in the restaurants that I've opened, you know, we didn't have the digitalization of HR. So everything was really archaic and files and paperwork and those kind of things. And then I remember when we opened our first restaurant, or one of our restaurants, that we said, like, there has to be an easier way to do HR. There has to be an easier way for all this paperwork and all of this onboarding process and the training. And then we started to look into things like Bamboo HR was like a software system that you can use. And it just made, like, it was such a game changer. But I never knew it had like a name or a thing around it. It was just like, we need help. And it was just interesting because, you know, it worked and then it didn't, because we had other software systems that needed to talk to the new HR software system that was digital, but those two systems didn't talk. So then it was like, how do we find software that talks to each other? So
Yep.
we're not inputting data in here and then the same data in this one and then the same data in this software system. So it was like, how can we get all of these to talk to each other? So you're inserting data into one system and it communicates everything you need to the other.
Yep. And the digitalization efforts to optimize your HR engine is a very important and critical thing that businesses should be investing and focusing on. The reason I'm bringing it up here is what you will find sometimes as an HR researcher is that people are trying to fix cultural problems with digital solutions. And if you're trying to fix a cultural problem with a digital solution, you're going to have a bad time, right? It's not going to go well. Here's an example. A lot of people want to get rid of performance management as a technical process because they just want people to, the manager should just be able to own this, right? Now, if you have high trust and high manager quality and a high degree of candor in your organization, you have all of those things, you can probably think about trimming down your performance management process because those things are happening implicitly between your managers and your employees. But guess what? 90% of the companies that want to get rid of performance management, it's not because they're already really good at it. It's because they're not really good at it and they want to not have to pay attention to it, right? And so as an HR researcher, digitalization is huge because it can save a ton of time, especially with the advent of generative AI. This is going to get bigger and bigger. But as a researcher, you have to say, okay, are we digitalizing something because we're comfortable taking the human out of the process and we want something to go faster? Or are we trying to circumvent something that shouldn't necessarily be circumvented yet? And do I have the evidence to support that case so that I can say, ooh, we're just going to be bad at this faster, guys. This is really not going to fix our problem for us. Ben, you look like you had something to say there before we move on.
No, I think this is a great example that you brought up, Chelsea. And I would say even in the large household named organizations that all of us know and we could talk about, which we won't because many of them are my customers and I can't talk about them, but you know what I'm talking about. Large organizations, household names. It is remarkable to me how many of their HR processes today are not digitalized. Or to Chris's point, and Chris, I think I love the point you made that if you're trying to change a cultural problem, or similarly, if you're buying, let's say you're working for an organization now and you purchased a new software, you go out to a request for proposal, an RFP, you get a new software provider, and this is going to fix all of our problems. No, it's not. The change management that goes in, that these things are not panaceas. And there's a lot of work that happens to install them and to get them, people using them correctly and all that good stuff, which outside of the scope of this course. But it's such a really good example of when you're working in your job in an organization as an HR practitioner, don't be surprised that even though the technology exists to do these things much quicker and faster, and these systems talk to each other, it often and most often doesn't work exactly the way it's supposed to. And that is one of the key roles of an organizational psychologist, is to, and maybe not central to this course, but as you go out into your world, you're going to have a better understanding of how people receive information. You're going to have a better understanding about how people form their perceptions of a new technology, and what's going to get them to use that new technology effectively. So this is a really critical example of something that you will face as you get out into the market, and you will absolutely face as an organizational psychologist. So I just really like the examples here.
Great. Thank you, Ben. We were going to talk a little bit about HR analytics Ikigai, but based on the speed that we're going at, I want to jump over that. That was in chapter 3. It's an important thing. If you haven't read through it, please go back and read over it. It's sort of it's a model of my own creation, but when we talk about the skill sets that go into HR analytics and creating a good balanced HR analytics function, having the business acumen, the computer science, the stats and research methods, and the human behavior are really critical in order to become a well-rounded HR analytics professional. And so the degree that you're pursuing is really focused on the human behavior and the stats and the research methods part. But getting the computer science and getting the business acumen are going to be really important to round out your skill set as you do more and more. And we're going to do a little bit with data manipulation this week or over this weekend. So you'll have some chance to get your fingers into that. But I want to skim over that because I want to get to some more important content for the day. So types of analytics. This was in the book reading that you guys did. And these, we're going to go through 3 models, and then we're going to talk amongst ourselves. We're going to spend a half an hour doing another breakout exercise. But I want to talk about descriptives, and these are actually from the book. So maybe I won't talk about it because you all did your reading. So why don't you guys tell me, who wants to raise their hand and tell me what is the purpose of descriptive statistics?
It is simply just to give information without any type of opinion.
Great. Yes. In a word, describe, right? There's a ton of information about data that we can use to understand it well. In the same way that I might try to describe the way Ben looks to somebody that has never met Ben, I can say he's got short, dark hair, he's got a clean shaven face, he's never wearing a collar unless you force him, he's at a wedding or funeral or church. And that would help somebody understand it. But importantly, Ben is not the sum of those descriptors, right? I have to give up some level of specificity in order to describe Ben and summarize him as a function of those characteristics. So anytime we do statistics, descriptive or otherwise, we have to give up some of that level of specificity, because that's what data is. It's a representation of the reality. It's not the actual reality. So describing, Tyler, spot on. Next, who wants to jump in on predictive?
I'll go ahead. Pretty much forecasting outcomes. What else? Consequences. I want to say costs, or even just like general effects in a business. That's where you use predictive statistics for.
Yes, all except the word cause, which you threw in there, which is a very dangerous
Oh,
word.
I said cost. Like
cost. Yeah.
Yeah,
Predictive
sorry.
is really, to your point, the idea of forecasting and simulation and being able to say, we know what's going to happen before it happens, right? Which is a very, very powerful thing in business. If I know how many people are going to quit, or how many people are going to buy, or how many people are right, I can make decisions faster in ways that are competitively advantageous to me and my organization. So predictive analytics gets to the point where we start to be able to say, we know enough about the past that we can say things about the future with confidence, right? Weather forecasting is a good example of predictive analytics, right? And if they say it's a 70% chance of rain, that means it's not going to rain necessarily. What it means is that 10 times they say there's a 70% chance of rain, it's going to rain 7 of the times. And if you look at the actual data of weather forecasting, it looks not that great because of how often they're wrong. But if you actually look at their aggregated and you look at all the times they predicted 70% chance of rain, it rained 70% of the time, almost perfectly, right? And that's what we're talking about when we say predictive, is that we can say what's going to happen with a certain degree of confidence. We're not going to get into confidence intervals and some of that stuff that's important in stats, but predictive is all about looking at the past and being able to make inferences about the future and be accurate. All right, last one, prescriptive.
That one is used to describe like why something happened or could happen in the future and what can be done to help influence that outcome.
Yes, the last part being the most critical. It is so what? So what there's a 70% chance of rain? Well, I don't know, bring an umbrella, right? That's the difference between predictive statistics and prescriptive statistics, right? Descriptive would say it's cloudy, it smells like rain, and I can feel it in the air. Predictive would be, it's probably going to rain. Prescriptive is take an umbrella with you. So once we get good, and we can often get to prescriptive from descriptive. We don't have to jump to predictive or inferential or any of those things. We can often make a good, solid recommendation for action just based on solid descriptive statistics. So they're all sort of in a progressive nature of maturity, because prescriptive also gets into things like simulations. So if I can set up a set of conditions and then run through, I can see what's going to happen. And now I'm using predictive analytics to create prescriptive analytics, which gets a little bit further down the methodological sophistication path. But the point is, when we talk about different kinds of analytics and you're choosing which to do in your organizations, am I trying to describe something, tell you how it is in the world? Am I trying to predict something so that we can make a choice? Or am I trying to prescribe something? Somebody has asked me for advice, and I have to use my expertise in the data I have to recommend a course of action. All right. Next, types of research, also from the text, and also from
Chris,
some of the videos. Oh,
real
yeah,
quick, sorry for interrupting you. I thought you might have an interesting perspective on Chelsea's question, in that are analytics ever all three? And I put in an initial answer, but I think I was answering a different question. I'm curious your answer to that, Chris.
By definition, they cannot be all three at the same time, but any given product or project or body of work can involve all three. If I'm describing, I am by definition not predicting, but I may describe before I go and try to predict, or I may predict in effort to prescribe. So if I'm going to prescribe something, I want to be able to predict it before I give a prescription, right? Or I may need to use triangulated predictive stuff in order to be able to create a simulation and then call that a prescription, right? So the short answer to your question is no, they can't all be the same thing. But any given research question you get, or any given real business problem, may involve all three. And you're kind of foreshadowing the exercise we're going to do in a little bit. So hold that thought. We'll be back to it. And
if I could just add one point there, which is in practice as an IO, and for example, I manage a lot of IOs, and what we often will do, or what a lot of times a new hire will do, is focus on the description and the prediction and totally miss the prescription. And that's what develops over time as you get experience in an organization of, okay, I have this project. I'm going to describe what's happening, what's going on with turnover in the sales organization. But better is then taking that forward to Chris's point and being able to say, okay, based on what we see in the data today and what we've seen historically in the data, what's likely to happen? What's likely to be the turnover rate this year based on what you've seen in the past? And even better than that, and what IOs should be doing, is then going to the business and saying, now, I'm not going to stop there. Here's a couple of ideas about what to do. Here's some interventions, back to the engineering piece that Chris talked about. So my version of the answer is, in practice, you should be thinking all three when you can.
Yeah, and the other side of that coin, the non-IO challenge with this, is that people want to take a little data and extrapolate a lot of action from it. And they don't necessarily, so in some ways, IOs tend to take too much time building that foundation and not thinking enough about the application. But the non-technical people do the opposite. They're like, run one pivot table and then we're going to start, firing people, right? Rather than saying, well, did we really beat up our premises well enough? Did we do the descriptives? Did we understand that maybe average wasn't the right metric to use here to make that decision? And so to Ben's point, I'm arriving at the same point from the opposite direction. In business, you've often got to encourage folks to take a breath and do the proper descriptive statistics before they jump right to predictive or prescriptive, because a lot of advanced math is built on assumptions in basic math that aren't necessarily checked out, right? I'll give you an example from a company that I can't say which of the four that I worked at, but they built a predictive measure based on engagement criteria that were coming from an engagement survey, basically. And the engagement survey was predictive based on what they were looking at. What they didn't realize is that some of the business lines had scheduling dynamics that prevented the people answering the survey from answering it about the right person. And so there was this huge chunk of the business that wasn't even being surveyed about the right people. But because they were a chunk that wasn't big enough to move the data overall, the overall data looked good. And so they just put the metric, put the intervention into effect. And this whole business line was like, this doesn't work at all for us, because they hadn't done the time to do the basic descriptive statistics to understand the fact that they had a reach problem in their engagement tool. All right, so let's jump to types of research. So exploratory, constructive, empirical. We're going to run through the same thing here. From the book that you guys read and the videos that you guys watched, who can tell me why these pictures make sense? Let's skin it down a little bit. Make the question a little bit less crazy. Why would we do exploratory?
Can I go a second, or who wants it?
No, go for it. I was gonna go and do it empirical, but I'll wait.
When would we do exploratory?
So here, I'll do constructive then.
Constructive
because you're basically working off of what's already there. It's going to be where you see other people's research being quoted heavily. Someone's trying to build off of that to create a new assumption. Empirical is going to be where someone's collecting data themselves on an individual basis. And then lead us home with exploratory.
Anybody want to jump in on exploratory, and then we'll dive into each?
I'll do exploratory since Tyler took empirical. No, I'm kidding. But it's to just study and get a better understanding of what the problem or issue could be. In this case, in the picture, it's just nature itself, exploring into it, getting deeper, clarifying answers, and trying to define what the forest is, what it's I want to say what it's for, and all that type of stuff.
Yep. So the analogy of the forest, the treehouse, and the person here is kind of as follows. And you guys did a great job kind of diving in and explaining each of these. Exploring, to your point, Stuart, it's untouched, right? There's no paths here. No one's been in here before. Exploratory research is the nature of figuring out what the problem is, because you may have never defined the problem before. You might not have the data. You might not have the phenomenon to get at. If you've never tried to quantify manager quality before, you're kind of starting from ground zero in your organization, and you have to explore what data exists. Where can I go and get it? Maybe what survey vendors do I need to help me out, or things like that. Exploratory research is when you don't know what the problem is yet. You don't understand the phenomena you're trying to quantify. And the point of the research is to define the problem and to define the constructs that you want to look at. Constructive, to Tyler's point, is you kind of been there. Right? You've been there. There's research on this. And the important difference between constructive and exploratory is constructive is about constructing something. It's about building something. You're trying to solve a problem, or you're trying to answer a question that will help you solve a problem. So building something, it's a far more engineering lean on research than exploratory research. Now, empirical is really where you get into what I would call the heavy science. And you have a lady there, I don't know if you can see, she's kind of looking into a petri dish, but she's not building anything. She's just trying to understand the nature of the forest, right? And empirical research is all about the generation of evidence. Now we're doing it towards particular constructs that become hypotheses. And so we have questions that have practical application, but we're not fundamentally trying to build something. We're fundamentally trying to answer a question. And that, if I was going to say empirical is very heavy on the science, constructive is very heavy on the engineering, right? And exploratory is kind of a little bit of each. Now, no one in your jobs, in your real life, is ever going to ask you for the definition of these three things, right? There is no, explicit value other than your own understanding of when you're attacking a problem, understanding, am I trying to explore something we've never looked at before? Am I trying to build something? Or am I trying to gather evidence so that I can answer a question? And those three different things are going to lead you down different paths about what you do first, second, and third. Cool? All right. The last thing we're going to talk about before we get into our exercise is this idea that I use a lot of quotes, like we said, and a lot of analogies. If one does not know to which port one is sailing, no wind is favorable. I mean, this is existential advice for your life, but it's also applicable to this class. And the reason it's applicable to this class is that knowing what problem you are solving is more important than solving the problem. And the reason for that is that you're probably not going to solve it entirely the first time. We just got through talking about engineering and how great products take years sometimes to generate. Ben works for one of the most successful survey companies on the planet, and they are constantly reevaluating what they know or what they think they know so that they can stay competitive and and create value for their customers. That's why you need to know the question before you actually start trying to answer it. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means. So when you're done with your research, what are you going to be doing when you're presenting it? And we're going to get to this later in the course about the tactics and techniques on this. But for the sake of the conversation of types of analytics and research today, you're probably going to be doing one of three things. When you're trying to reinforce a message, the research is helping you communicate. It's helping you help understand what is the data, what is it saying, and why is that important. Sometimes you're trying to make the audience see something they've never seen before. So they've been looking at a problem, but they've been looking at it the wrong way or the wrong lens, or they've been missing something, and you're trying to illuminate what it is that they're seeing. Third, sometimes you're trying to evaluate. So something has been done and you're trying to look backwards and you're trying to measure some kind of impact. So we're going to talk through a couple of examples, right? First, we need to ramp up diversity efforts. A presenter of research here might have to say, well, what's the current state? Why is that bad? And how should we fix it? And the person listening to that presentation is going to be saying, do I agree this is a problem? If I do, is it a priority? And do I agree with the approach, right? So in this case, we're trying to communicate a problem that's happening. When I'm trying to illuminate, we might say, well, why is turnover so high? That's a very common thing in business, right? So the presenter here is going to say what we analyzed, how we analyzed it, what it showed. And then as the stakeholder, we have to say, does this make sense? Is the solution that you're presenting actually going to impact stakeholders? And then the third is onboarding, right? Our onboarding program has improved retention. We're making a statement saying that we did a thing and it worked. So we have to explain the thing, we have to explain the measurement, and we have to show results. And then as the listener, I'm going to have to decide whether that measurement is valid and is it significant such that I'm happy with what I saw. When you put those three things together, data is typically doing one of these three things. You're trying to sell some kind of story or tell some kind of story. You're trying to solve a puzzle. This is when we get kind of like causal analysis and that kind of stuff. Or you're trying to quantify an impact. You're trying to say, hey, we did an intervention of some kind and it did or it did not work. Now, we've talked about types of research, we've talked about types of analytics, and we've talked about some of these basic ways that you can apply research once you've actually done it and completed it, and you're ready to work with it. So this is going to be a longer one. It's going to be 15 minutes and 15 minutes. We're going to break you guys out, and Chelsea, did we lose her? Where did she go? Oh, there she is. Chelsea, we're gonna your check's in the mail, because what we're gonna talk about now is, where do these things overlap? I want you guys to get together, and in groups of two, you're gonna create a few examples, real examples, either from your actual work or hypothetical ones you can come up with, of how each of these things are going to work together. It could be three green things, where you're like, hey, here's how I would use exploratory and then constructive and then empirical research. Or you could say, hey, I did some exploratory research and that led to me having to do some descriptive statistics. And then that helped me tell a story that I then was able to use to go back and do constructive research to solve a puzzle. So do you guys pick up what I'm putting down here on what I'm hoping for you to do? I want you to take these 9 things, and if you want to take a screen cap of it right now so that you have them, I'll come back to your question in a sec, Rebecca. Essentially, I want you to think through these ideas. Where can you come up with some hypotheticals and then apply these 9 concepts to those hypotheticals so that we can come back. You can tell us about your own story, your own hypothetical, and then you can say, I would do this, and then I would do this, and then I would do this, and that would help me move myself towards something that's actionable. Becca, question?
Yeah, just trying to clarify. So it's kind of like a mix and match problem solving of these 9, and these are our tools. These 9 tools we can mix and match to solve a hypothetical.
Correct, right? And it can be any hypothetical that you guys want to come up with, and it can be any combination of these 9 things. But think about what kind of questions am I asking? That's the research world. What kind of math I might do? That's the statistics or the analytics. And then what am I actually trying to convince somebody of? What story am I trying to tell that's going to help me actually move hearts and minds to get work done? Cool? Brittany, do you have a setup already? You are on mute.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted myself. I do have a setup. I just want to clarify. So it says 15 and 15. So is it a total of 30 minutes for breakout or 15 minutes for breakout, and then we're going to come back?
15 for breakout, and then we're going to come back for 15.
That's what I thought. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're ready to go.
All right. See you guys in a
Cool.
few.
Yeah. Welcome back, guys.
How did everybody do?
Oh,
Yeah. Some mild nods.
That was fun.
It was good. All right.
Yep, very good.
Good. I'm glad. I was telling Dr. Ben, and we know that this is a pilot, right? Thinking through how to make such some abstract concepts into a thought experiment that you guys could do was tough, right? Because to learn about analytics, you usually just get a whole bunch of data and work your way through it. But we couldn't really do that in 15 minutes. So I'm interested to hear your guys' thoughts on the hypotheticals you came up with, and also how you were able to mush these 3 domains together in a way that helped you think through different kinds of analytics, different kinds of research, and different kinds of purposes for those 2 things.
So ours wasn't so much a hypothetical as it was a real life scenario that I'm experiencing right now, and I wanted to leverage this activity to help me solve my problems at work.
Free consulting. I'm in. Let's do it.
So, and I also don't know if we over rotated on this. We only got through 1 hypothetical in the time allotted. So basically we took the hypothetical of an onboarding program okay, so basically there's no onboarding program beyond just the basic housekeeping, legal signatures, and Dayforce orientation. So new hires don't feel supported throughout their onboarding process. So we've kind of combined, I'd say, 5 of these circles. And the first one is starting with descriptive statistics to understand what is the turnover data, what is the time to onboard into a role, what does the surveys say about employee experience, new hire employee experience, and then prescriptive to explain the data that we collected and communicate what will happen if we do nothing. And then moving to predictive, which would be designing so we should design some sort of a onboarding program, maybe a 0 to 90 day program with intentional touch points between supervisors and new hires. Then doing constructive research to build some sort of program around this data and try to pilot or test and retest and construct a solution to this problem. And then ultimately quantifying the impact of how this will impact our key results, retention, maybe if we pilot it, collect data on how it's gone, et cetera, et cetera. So that's
Yeah, I like that. And you pulled from each of them. So I'm going to restate it a little bit, and you can tell me if I'm on track with what you were saying. And I may add a few things. So you talked about starting with descriptive statistics. I think I might even put in the concept of exploratory research there. where you're going to go in and you're going to look at these data. Maybe you're going to create some correlations that have never been correlated before, maybe some cross tabulations that have never been cross tabulated before. And then you're going to use that probably to tell a story to somebody who can write a check or invest the time in order to help you fix this, right? That's typically called a business case, right? And then you're going to say, oh, well, now it's time for some constructive research, right? We're going to go build a thing, but we're not just going to build a thing and launch it. We're going to do research and see if it works. Maybe we're going to pilot it. Maybe we're going to validate an assessment of some kind, right? But ultimately, we're going to be building something which is going to require descriptive and predictive or inferential analytics so that we can construct something that we need. And then once we have the thing, we can implement it, quantify the impact with empirical research. We can go back and look and say, did the thing that we did have the effect that we thought it did? And now does the future look different from the past? And all that exploratory research we did where we knew what our turnover rates are and our stick rates and all that kind of stuff, now it's going to be different because of all that stuff.
Yeah, it's actually funny because Tyler had originally wanted to make the constructive research the overall, but I was confused on, does the constructive research, does that go before the data collection? Can it be the precursor to that as kind of like the overarching is what he was saying? And then I was thinking, well, do we need the data before we do the constructive research? I was a little bit confused on the order of that, so I pushed back a little bit, but I'd be interested to hear your response to that.
So all research by definition requires gathering data. In today's digital world, you don't always have to create data. Sometimes data exists that you can just go get and do research with, right? Now, that will always be retrospective because you can't create data that hasn't happened yet, right? But you don't always have to make data. Sometimes we want to make data because we're implementing a program or we're putting a survey out or we're doing something because we want to generate data that we don't have yet. So the answer to your question is it depends. It could be either, right? In the case that you put out there, Becca, I think you're not starting with constructive, right? Now, that would depend often on where the senior leadership is with respect to how big of a problem this is. If you've got the CHRO barking about the fact that this is a problem, you may not need to waste a ton of time with exploratory and descriptive research because you're not trying to sell anyone on the fact that it's a problem. But if you think it's a problem but nobody else does, you're probably going to have to do this exploratory research so that you can make the business case that you need to get the bandwidth and the resources and the backing that you need so that you can do the constructive research. Does that help clarify a little bit?
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yeah, and when we get into storytelling and some of the data viz and presentation stuff, which is really Dr. Ben's wheelhouse, we're going to talk about different ways to visualize and present depending on which kind of research you're trying to put out there in order to move hearts and minds in the particular applications that you're going to be doing it. All right, let's hear from a different group.
We can go. So I was with Stuart, and I'll speak on mine. He could speak on his. We came up with a couple, but the last one I came up with kind of popped into my mind and it was a little crazy. So I work for Tito's Handmade Vodka, and so we like the story of Tito's and how he got started kind of like took over, and I feel like embodies so much of this. I'll kind of specifically talk on like how he built the first distillery in Texas. He wasn't always like the vodka guy. He was actually a scientist. He was a geophysicist or something like that. He was all into oil and space. And so when he started his vodka, he wanted to build a distillery in Texas, and Texas said, no, we don't have that. Like there are no distilleries in Texas. And so he was like, okay. So I guess he started with exploratory research and descriptive analytics, kind of looking into like, this hasn't been done before in Texas. So how do we do this? He's also not a distiller. So how do I do this? So then he like went through all these prohibition books to learn how to distill liquor and what's the best process and what tools did they use. And so I guess that's kind of constructive research. Some of the data was already there, but it was very outdated. So he was like, how do I build this in today's world? So he did. And then after he built the distillery and started making the product, he kind of dove into the empirical research side of things where he observed and looked at the evidence, which is his product. And then he launched his product and kind of got into the quantifying impact state and evaluating the product. He also communicated the product. He had to tell his story. And so I just felt like it was a little bit all over the place in so many of these areas, but that's how I could best focus it.
I love this example because it's outside of the HR realm. It's just about business, which is ultimately what we're all engaged in when we become HR practitioners, right? And Chelsea, you hit the nail on the head that this founder said, this doesn't really happen here. There is no solution. So I need to explore and understand. Because remember, research isn't fundamentally about data. Research is fundamentally about the expansion of knowledge, right? So you can do research in history. You can do research in the humanities, right? You can do research in all kinds of things that sound awfully not science-y, but actually are, because you're going out and figure out, well, what's the legislative landscape? What's the ecological landscape? What's the regulatory landscape? And how am I going to make a vodka company happen in Texas, right? Then once you get the paperwork signed, you actually have to do it. And now you have to move from exploratory to constructive, where now we're going to engineer a way to do the thing, which means I have to understand how to distill. I have to buy real estate. I have to get all the proper certifications. I've got to purchase the right equipment. I've got to hire people. I've got to source ingredients, right? And that's a logistical nightmare. You've got to construct a process for that. And guess what? He probably wasn't right on every single decision he made, right? When he started, he probably failed a lot before he became Tito's. And so that's a really, really great example of walking from an idea all the way through execution, right? And then ultimately being able to quantify his impact, which in business, we're often lucky because we get things like market share and sales that tell us whether we're doing a good job or not. But it's a really, really good example.
Thanks.
Cool. Stuart, you had one?
Yes, mine is like simpler, but I'll go ahead and say mine. Mine's religious based, so I put God creating Earth. So pretty much for when he created Earth, the descriptive part of it was he had to identify what he needed for Earth. From there, he had an empirical thinking, which means he had to observe what he created, and from there he tells the story, which is us learning from the history that what has happened. So it's simple, it's vague, but it's like that's my thought of mixing all these together and coming up with an idea of how God created Earth.
I never quite thought of the flood as a form of constructive research to to tweak the engineering design, but it's a really interesting lens to put on the Old Testament. I'm there with you.
Hey, it was just an idea and I wanted to share it because I believe it could be legitimate.
Fair enough. All right. Why don't we do one more? And then we'll move on because I want to spend a good amount of time talking about the assignments that you guys have for the end of the week. So who wants to jump in with one more to close us out?
We talked about something a little more general. So like a new drug being explored to treat Alzheimer's disease. And so we kind of went through like everything you see here. So we were descriptive, what current drugs are out there, what are they made of, who they have been given to, the cost of the drug. For predictive, what are the reactions to the drug, the severity of the disease and its stage and how current drugs have affected that. And then for like prescriptive, what does the new drug target can the drug cause other complications? And then just exploratory is exploring the new drug. And then for constructive is research based on the existing drug and or the existing drugs, and then the correlation of what is included in each drug to the new one. And then how patients have reacted to past drugs to treat the condition or the disease. And then empirical is so Mallory and I decided that there would be like a treatment group and then a control group to kind of test whether or not the drug has a significant impact. And then for tell a story, how many people are currently suffering from the disease, their life expectancy and quality based on their current stage of the disease, the age range that the condition is affecting, accessibility of the drug, and then the feasibility of the drug. And then for like solve a problem, that the drug will hopefully improve the quality and life expectancy, and then as well as minimizing symptoms of the disease. And then for quantifying the impact, so based on the treatment group, we can determine, or we would be able to determine the kind of impact the new drug has on the condition and whether it truly extends the quality and expectancy of life.
Yeah. Look, pharma is a fantastic place to look if you want to understand how science and engineering work together, right? The pharma engineering or the pharma industry in general is there. I want to push on what you guys talked about a little bit and think beyond the science of the development of a drug, right? And what other places within the pharmaceutical business might you want to do different applications and or different kinds of research? So where might you want, outside of drug development in pharma, need to show up with data?
I mean, I would say like medical devices.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, within the drug space specifically.
Oh.
Like the amounts, like the quantities of how much you should take?
I would still put that in development, right? That's part of development. I'm thinking different parts of the
generics versus
potentially
generics versus
manufacturing,
like the brand.
right? Scaling to manufacturing would be a place. Sales. If I'm a rep and I'm going to sell to doctors who know a thing or two about Alzheimer's, the kind of research that I need to have at my disposal and the kind of stories I need to tell, same data, but I need it in a different way, right? I need to be able to tell stories in a compelling way, in a way that differentiates my drug from the other drug, right? Or how about funding, where I have an idea for the development of a drug, but I need somebody to be to write a check so that I have the time and the resources to go and even do the research that Mariah talked about, right? So all of I think your layout, Mariah, was really great because literally every single one of these things happens across the development of a drug. However, the pharmaceutical business has a lot of need for research and the presentation of that research and lots of different applications that make the overall business go. Cool. All right. So we have 22 minutes left of lab, and we are going to talk through the 3 major things that you all have to do before the end of the week. The first one that's really simple before I even change the slide here is the discussion board. I'm not sure if you had to do this in other classes, but it is a part of this class. Each week, you have to reflect and post on the discussion board, one for lecture and one for lab. And it's going to be the same question every week, which is go back to the big study guide and go back to the little study guide and pick one new question or one question that your answer has changed the most on. And we want you guys to post, now that you've been through the lecture and you've been through the lab, go back to your study guides and you have to pick 2 questions, one from big and one from little, and you've got to rewrite them. And sorry, my cat is demanding to leave the room, so give me 1 second. Unless you all want to meet her. You guys all want to meet her?
Yes.
Yes.
Please.
This
Yes,
is my
absolutely.
administrative assistant.
Oh, there you go.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, she's very
So
fluffy.
fluffy.
She's so fluffy.
She's also very chill as far as cats go. So she's my buddy. and she hangs out with me during lecture. So
She's like, I just wanted to leave, and I
what's
get
that?
this. She's like, I just wanted to leave.
She's been sleeping the whole time. She just decided it was time to go to bed. She's like, I'm not waiting for you anymore. All right. So with that, we're going to jump. So the discussion board stuff you all have to do, that's going to be every week. One for lecture, one for lab. So make sure that you do that. I think it's worth 10 points a week per across the whole thing. So don't forget to do that. Now, let's talk about the heavier stuff. First, argumentation practice. We are going to you're going to hear Ben and I say the word vignettes all the time, or restating things in a testable way, restating problems in a testable way. So all the argumentation work that we did as a team yesterday, and all the videos you watched are now going to become real, because you guys are going to work your way through actual hypotheticals and break out what the premises and the conclusions are. And each week for the next 4 weeks, you're going to get a couple more vignettes. And as we get to the bottom and we get through, I think it's going to be 9 in total, the last 2 are going to be ones that you're going to use for your final project, right? So this practice, Ben and I were really serious when we said the argumentation mindset is really one of the most critical things that you're going to do in this class. So I'm actually going to show you what it looks like. I'm going to explain it, and then we'll move on to the next couple. So you guys can still see my screen, yes? All right. So think about this in terms of colors. It doesn't matter what the words are right now, but the blue cells are week 1, the red cells are week 2, the green cells are week 3, and the yellow cells are week 4, right? So just put that in your brain for a second, and then we're going to zoom in and I'm going to talk about exactly what we're going to do. So week 1, we've loaded in, and this is all on Canvas, 3 different hypotheticals. One about RTO, one about hiring strategy, and one about engagement. And you're going to read these hypotheticals, and you're going to break those hypotheticals down into 3 different component statements or arguments that you think the arguer or participant in the hypothetical is making. Then you're going to take those, and you're going to turn them into premises and a conclusion, right? It can be deductive. It's more likely going to be inductive, hint, hint. But we have examples of both up above for you to look at with an example hypothetical that's right out of the textbook. So for Saturday, what do I have to do by Saturday at noon? All the blue cells. 1, 2, 3 vignettes, 3 components, or 8 component statements, 3, 3, and 2, and then breaking those down into actual premise, conclusion statements. Does that all track for everybody? Okay, that's goal number 1. Next week, Ben is going to go deeper with you guys on restating things in testable ways. So we're going to go from argumentation to operational definitions and hypotheses and a lot of the more formal language that we use in science. And so next week, we're going to add this idea that, hey, now we're going to restate these arguments in a way that we can actually go and test them with some kind of research, right? So you're going to have to add those testable statements for each of these 8 things that you've created. And then we're also going to add 2 new vignettes. And so for the 2 new vignettes, you're going to do the premises and the conclusions, and you're going to add in the testable statements, right? Then in week 3, we're going to talk about independent variables, dependent variables, and you're going to actually be able to turn those plain language testable ideas into formalized hypotheses with variables and directionality and operational definitions and all the things that we're going to get into over the next couple of weeks. And so in that week, you're going to take all the ones that you've done so far, and you're going to add in all of your stuff here, and then we're going to add 2 new vignettes, right? So these will all come in as we go through. And then in week 4, right, you're going to do soup to nuts on the final 2 vignettes, and those are the ones that you're going to be spending the majority of the rest of the course working with real fake data that you're going to do your stats on and your data manipulation, and you're going to build your presentation on and all of that stuff. So these vignettes, if you look through the scoring, they're a big deal, right? Each one is worth 70 points in the lecture, in the 3-credit version of this. So throughout the year, you're going to download this one, right? And you're going to do this one this week, and you're going to upload it as an assignment. And then next week, Ben is going to give us a Word document, and that Word document is going to have the 2 new vignettes and additional stuff. So you'll be able to drop the vignette text into your Excel document and upload a more complete version. So every week your spreadsheet's going to get a little bit more complete. And by week 4, you're going to have this whole thing completed and you're going to be able to use it going forward for the rest of the class. I know that was a lot in a short period of time. I see lots of nodding. That's a good sign. Anything like super confusing? Oh my God, what the hell did you just tell us? Speak now. We good? All right. Good news. And if you have questions, Brittany can help you. I'm just kidding. Me and Ben are still here. All right. Thing number 2 that we need to do. There's a major assignment that's due on Saturday that is called the data manipulation practice. This is also loaded in Canvas. We haven't talked much about data manipulation. We're going to talk about it more next week. But data is the language of research, right? And so tables and fields and columns and primary keys and populations and all these things all come back to data tables. So in the big study guide, or in the Canvas within module 1 are a bunch of videos all about how to do data manipulation in a very specific way. We're not going to do it all in one week, but what you're going to have is an Excel sheet that looks like this. And if you've ever worked in a real org, even if you haven't, this is a real way you might actually see data. So we have a roster with some people and some blank fields. We have location information, where they sit. We have cost center by employee. We have job information, what their job code is. And these are all scrubbed and real fake data. But the assignment is going to be you having to fill out all the blank fields. And in some of these places, you're going to have to actually influence the data. So you're going to have to move data from one sheet to another. And you can see, as an example, create a first name and last name field for each employee. So I'll give you guys a gimme. That's going to be the concatenate formula. You can go into the roster, and after you watch the concatenate video, if you don't already know how to concatenate, you should be able to create a first name and a last name for all of the employees in this sheet, right? And so there is spaces for concatenation, for parsing, or text to columns, pivot tables, VLOOKUPs, removing duplicates, and all of these. After you watch the videos, these questions will make more and more sense to you, right? And so you're going to work your way through which formula you used. Give me a very short, brief kind of, hey, here's how I thought about the problem and here's what I did. And then these are all practical changes to the data you need to make. And then these are ones where you have to calculate something and give me a number, an answer, after you figured out how many unique managers there are, as an example. Cool? And we're going to spend a good part of lecture next week talking about and going over this assignment, right? So if this sounds really scary and intimidating, watch the videos, rewatch the videos, rewatch the videos, and kind of walk through each of these data chunks and figure out how to work your way through this assignment.
Quick
Julie.
clarifying question. Sorry. So just to understand, like, this assignment kind of feels like a way to learn how to use Excel to manipulate data. So it's really just walking us through some basic manipulation tools in order to use that very practically. That's what it feels like.
110%. I would venture to guess that probably 90% of corporate America is running on Excel. They'll go spend tons of money on giant software packages and survey tools and human capital management systems. But the amount of time that data just gets dumped out onto a laptop and transformed in Excel is a lot higher than you might think. So having a skill set in Excel to do the basic data manipulation, Becca, you're 100% right. But also, I want you guys to use your thought processes about argumentation and concepts and see how that starts to translate to data manipulation. If I wanted to connect two concepts, like what job someone's in and where they sit, because I wanted to be able to look at particular people that are sitting in a particular location, that's a phenomenological concept. I want to analyze people in California compared to people in New York, but my where they sit and what job they do data isn't connected. So if I want to answer a question like that, I have to be able to put those pieces of data together. And things like primary keys and pivot tables and removing duplicates are all going to help you on that path. So you're right, Becca, it is about the manipulation and sort of getting some practice with that. But it's also thinking about, I've taken an idea, now I actually have to create data that reflects that idea so that I can test it. Julie, I think you had a hand up. You are on mute.
I tried downloading this class's what is it, WC assignment, and it says that there's an error downloading it, retrieving the document. So
Yeah, I got the same thing.
Okay, Britt and Alex and I will figure that out soon.
okay.
So thank you for raising that. Any questions about this one? I know we haven't spent a lot of time on data manipulation. We're not going to spend a ton of time on data manipulation beyond this, the time we spend in next week's lecture. And then when you get into your stats work, you're going to have to revisit a lot of this in order to be able to do the stats work, which is kind of intentional. But if you have questions, let us know. Anything super unclear? Cool. All right. Finally, we are going to move to your first paper. So this one isn't showing up yet in your Canvas, and that's because it's going to show up next week because it's not due this Saturday. It's due the following Saturday. But I want to give you guys some lead time on this. And if you want to print screen this or screen cap it in advance of the week 2 stuff coming out, it should be out in the next day or so. But this week, we're wrapping up the concept of argumentation and something that I like to call healthy tension, right? And a lot of things we do, Stuart said this very early on, like maybe we'll make a decision and that'll make some people not want to come to the church and other people want to come to the church. That's such a real thing, that healthy tension exists within a lot of things, but we often see tension as a bad thing when it's actually two good things pulling on each other. Science and engineering have tension with each other, right? Analytics and action, right? Doing more science and learning more stuff and doing stuff, right? Has tension. The healthy tension that we talked about across all the different domains are really important because what they're doing is they're challenging us to think about our thinking, right? And that's actually a concept. It's called metacognition. And tons of people wander through their whole life, never challenging the paradigms and the ideas and the thoughtful shortcuts that they've developed over their life. I hope in the last 2 classes, we've really started to challenge assumptions that we make when we make arguments and when we hold opinions so that we can be really thoughtful about attacking those opinions for the betterment of the decision making, right? Now, this writing assignment is intended to be a retrospective on that. We want you guys to reflect on all the materials that we've engaged with, and we want you to explain them kind of in a written format. So down below, right, you can see the standard stuff, 1,500 words, APA format, but then these guideposts for you are, what are the components of an argument? Why do we need to challenge them? How is questioning them useful, right? Talk about sound versus valid arguments. Talk about deductive versus inductive, right? Compare and contrast science and engineering. I want you guys to get really deep and reflective on what we talked about over the last 4 hours in the last 2 days and spend the time crafting a message and telling a story. And most importantly, you look at that last bullet point, take a stance on why these matter. Even if part of what you think is, I don't really think that thing you said does matter that much, Chris. And here's why I don't think it matters that much, right? This is me also kind of putting my own thoughts about my own schooling here, right? Most of my schooling, they were like, here are the facts, regurgitate the facts, right? We've given you some facts, we've given you some thoughts on stuff, but I want you guys to have a thoughtful opinion about it, right? And your grade is going to be as much reflected on whether you're thinking critically about the stuff we said, as much as your ability to regurgitate the facts that were in the text. So take the time. That's why we're giving you guys 2 full or like almost 2 full weeks to do this. Because it's going to take a lot of thought to really come up with some opinions on this. Because Ben and I are not the only 2 guys and gals who do this kind of work, right? There's lots of people with lots of opinions on this, and you get to have an opinion. And so we want you guys to go through, we want you to think through the material, and then we want you to produce something that kind of approaches these 4 bullet points. Becca, you have a question?
Yeah, and I think you kind of just answered it, but does the story we tell have to include every single component of each of those 4 bullet point prompts? Like, does it have to hit on each and every single one? I know, like, probably each of the 4, but are you looking for us to hit, like, every single piece of information in each of those bullet points in the story?
I think there are some major concepts that you want to make sure you get across, right? The components of an argument. And you can't really talk about the components of an argument without talking about how you beat them up. And you can't talk about beating them up without talking about sound versus valid. So okay. I think as you get through and you try to poke holes in what you did and didn't talk about, most of the stuff that we put on here is probably going to make its way in there. Do you need to go down to the nth degree on every single one? No, you're not going to be able to do that in 1,500 words. You're going to have to make some hard choices about what to include and what not to include. Shorter papers are harder to write than long papers because you can't afford to waste words, right? And that's a very real skill in corporate America, being able to make yourself known in a short amount of space or time. So if 1,500 words feels like not enough, that's probably good, right? So the short answer to your question is no, Becca. The longer answer is you're probably going to get to most of it, I hope.
That makes sense. I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah, cool. What other questions you guys have? All right. Ben.
So I have a question,
Oh, go ahead, Tyler.
just as far as like the deadlines. Since we did change the weekly assignment like workload and like the deadlines for that, is it possible to elongate our Saturday turn-in times if possible?
You mean in general or for this particular week?
Yeah, in general, sorry. Yes, in general, like making them a later time, like 9 p.m. on Saturday evening.
Let Ben and I take that back and think on it. The reason we chose Saturday, that wasn't an arbitrary date. It was so that Dr. Ben and I, around our day jobs, have 2 full nights to look at content. Because if you turn it in at noon, that gives us Saturday night and Sunday night to grade stuff so that we can turn it around reasonably quickly. If we push it back to 9 o'clock your time, that's 1 in the morning for me. So I don't get it. I lose a night. So that's why it's noon. Let Ben and I talk about it. Maybe we can squeeze a few more hours out. What other questions do you guys have?
This isn't so much a question as it is just like feedback. I really like the way that these assignments are structured, and I feel like it has a really great practical application. So I just really appreciate the thought behind this because I feel like it's very challenging in a good direction. And I just wanted to say that I really like these assignments, so I'm excited to dig into them, which might make me a nerd, but I'm going to say it.
You're not an IO if you're not a nerd.
That's
Amen.
fair. Welcome. Welcome to
Yes,
the
welcome.
Nerdtopia. No, we appreciate the feedback for sure. And honestly, Ben and I love feedback. We have very thick skin, so I'm grateful for the positive feedback. Also grateful to continue to hear from you guys what's not working or what you need to be tweaked so that it can be more effective.
That's a good point too. And I just echo that point. Like if there are things that are difficult to understand, please raise those points because we want to make sure we get better. And like we've said at the beginning of the course, this is a pilot. This is the first time Chris and I are compiling this material, and we're going to make some mistakes. So please do call that out. And it's also possible that we may have some challenging conversations at certain points. And I'm just being real, right? Where you may say, hey, this is crazy that we have to do this much. And we may come back and say, well, that's graduate school. So it is possible we may have a response, but it's also very possible that you're going to call out something that we need to go fix. So please raise it. And we're wide open to your feedback on this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I also I think it's fair, since we have the 2 minutes here, to be candid that the first 2 weeks we're gonna have a lot of stuff going on, and it's gonna get heavy in a rush. We know that this is an accelerated program, so you're all prepared for that. These first 2 weeks are very theoretical, and we're talking a lot about concepts and ideas, and we're writing and we're ideating. When we start to get into the heavier research methods and stat stuff, it's going to get heavy, and the stuff is going to get a little bit more technical, and that's okay. I don't know if I'm over speaking, Brittany, but this is probably one of the most technical courses in the curriculum. And so that's where you guys are going to have to start raising your hands. When Britt and Ben and I talked about this, there is stat help and other things. There's computer science. There's tons of places you can go and get help outside the lines of the lecture. So just be thoughtful about that. That we're in first gear right now, but in 2 weeks it's going to feel a lot more like fifth gear. So we want you guys to be ready for that, and the engagement with the materials, watching the videos, actually reading the paper or the material, all that, doing that stuff, like taking the study guide material seriously, it's going to be a big deal and it's going to be cumulative. And by the time we get to week 5 and 6 and you start designing your final presentation, basically what I'm saying is the investment you put in now is going to pay interest in weeks 4 and plus. So keep that in mind. All right. And with that, we're going to end on time. Look at us go.
Yeah, I'm so proud. Couple quick points as you guys head out the door. Don't forget, next Thursday is our dinner. You'll get a formal invite from me this week. But make sure that you have that date saved. It's Thursday the 18th. We're gonna do like a 30-minute from 6 to 6:30 kind of networking open end, and then dinner's gonna start at 6:30. So I'll try to get to Vanguard by 6:30. It'll be at Vanguard's main campus. And then just a couple of other points. We came back from break. We're hitting the ground running. Chris did not speak out of turn when he said that this is a very technical class. This is going to be one of the more challenging classes that you'll have in this program. So buckle up, buttercups. Like you've got some groundwork to lay. Come in with your whole self. And then while you guys were in one of your breakouts, Chris, Ben, and I were talking. I just want to reiterate, this is something you guys have heard from me before, but I want to reiterate the importance of knowing that what you put in is what you'll get out. You're all paying for this program, and it's going to be impossible for you to do well in this class if you're not engaged. So that looks like, being engaged in class, taking those notes, being focused. So how that is reflected will be in your grades. Obviously, if you know what you're doing and you're tracking with class, then you're going to do well on assignments. And if you're not, then you're not. Remember, you cannot pass a class with less than a C, and you can only get 1 C in the entire program. So I just want to make sure that you understand the parameters of this program and what you've signed up for and being a part of a grad program. If you have any questions on that, I'm available to chat, but those were just some closing thoughts that I wanted to make sure I shared with you guys. Any questions, comments, concerns, or unconfessed sins before we peace out?
We still don't have access to the videos for week 2.
Yeah, all of week 2 should be open, with the exception of the vignettes, which we're tightening up, and the week 3 welcome video, which will actually be part of week 3 prep technically. But most of week 2 should be open for business.
Okay.
Including the big study guide.
That's not the case in the
That's not the case, Tyler.
Main course.
It's not. Okay. We'll follow up. So we have the follow up on the vignette 1 download, and we have the follow up on making sure that the big study guide is open for week 2.
Okay. Thank you for that. If you guys run into any issues with that, make sure you let me know.
And then are we going to be able to have access to these 2 recordings before the weekends?
Yes, you absolutely will. I'm going to work on editing out the dead time for the breakouts, and then I'll post that. I'll post those into the module for you.
And I'm going to PDF these slides so that they can get posted as well. It's a long thing because it's a lot of build slides because I don't use animations, but y'all will get what you need out of it, I think.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Britt. Thank you, both of the professors. Actually, my apologies.
All right. We'll see you guys next Monday.
Thank you.
See you, Professor. Thank you.
Have a great
good evening.
weekend.
Have a good week.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.